And hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Flyers Files on BFA Live Sports. I'm Kevin Durso, your host, and we've got quite a bit to talk about this week. Before we get into all of the Flyers hockey to discuss some topics on and off the ice, reminder, follow along with me in my coverage at Kevin_Durso on the Twitter X platform, on Instagram, on TikTok, pre- and post-game videos, and pre- and post-game articles, and everything else in between. You can find everything that I'm doing at Kevin_Durso. And be sure to follow along with BFA as well for everything going on with this channel, with the platform, trying to get more shows out there to you, the viewers, and shows on everything, not just what I'm doing with the Flyers, but all of the teams in the city, making sure we have it covered across the board. So be sure to follow along. Let's kind of get into our rundown, and then we'll get started. So first off, we are going to review the past week of games. Got a few topics to discuss as well as we go through this. The Flyers have hit the quarter mark on the 2025-26 season. So we'll discuss how the first 21 games have gone. They're now through 21. The 20-game mark is kind of that number, though, that people associate with the quarter mark. So we will discuss that and where the team is at the quarter mark. Is there a flaw in the Flyers rebuild? Some interesting comments that were made, some clips that we can discuss and kind of touch on where everybody's thoughts are and everybody's feelings are about this rebuild process and where it's going and the ultimate goal of building a contender, because there certainly are some questions as it starts to hit a critical point. And a couple other topics we're going to get into about specific players. Nikita Grebenkin has not been utilized frequently. He's a player who's obviously in need of development. We will talk about him and his usage. Matvei Michkov hit the 100-game mark in his NHL career. We will talk about him and where he's at this stage of his career. And more to come, as it was a busy week, partially on home ice. Then the Flyers started a road trip. Let's get into all of that and get started. Let's start with the week in review. There it is for you, what's been going on so far over the course of the last week with the Flyers. Started things off. They played Thursday night on home ice after a bit of a break, extended time off from game action, at least, and a lot of time to work on things in practice. And the Flyers get a 3-2 win in overtime against the St. Louis Blues. Travis Sanheim had the game-winning goal there. The Flyers trailed in the game 2-0. They rallied back to tie it, force overtime, and then get the game winner. Saturday, a big win over the New Jersey Devils, 6-3. The Flyers scoring 3 goals in 26 seconds. That's a franchise record. Michkov had a goal, 2 by Tyson Forster over that 26-second span. Noah Cates scored in the first period. It was 4-1 after the first period. The Flyers did give up the first goal in that game, but took a commanding 4-1 lead after 20 minutes. Bobby Brink scored in the second period. Trevor Zegras scored in the third period. The Flyers did give up a couple goals during the course of that remainder of the period, but nonetheless get a big win. And then Monday night, they started the road trip off with kind of a dud, a 3-0 loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not much generated, not much to speak of. So not a very good game for them. It's a bit of a rarity so far on the season that they've had games where they're not very competitive. That was certainly one of them. And certainly you want to consider a lot of things when you discuss this team as we get to the Flyers at the quarter mark. And at 20 games, the Flyers had an 11-6-3 record. And I talked about this a little bit last week, that take the 3 out of the picture for a second here, the 3 overtime losses, because those games all featured something, it felt like, that could have gone the other way. And a week ago, before they played 3 more games and got up to 21 games, they were at 18 games played and had a 9-6-3 record. And everybody kind of could look at that and think, yeah, it's about, maybe a little bit above expectations, but it's about what everybody expected. And really, the impressive thing would be if you turn some of those overtime losses into wins. They look like they have a win against Carolina. It gets called back on goalie interference. And maybe that's debatable, but they don't finish the job off. They don't finish the game off with the win. They end up giving up the goal before it even gets to a shootout. So the game doesn't go their way. The game against Edmonton a couple weeks ago, you're in a tie game, 1-1, final minute. You score a goal. It looks like you're going to win the game in regulation. No, it's offside. You lose the game in overtime. Things like that kind of cloud the picture, because it would certainly sound a lot better to say 11-6-1 than 9-6-3. And I wonder if the 2 wins that they got last week changed that perception just a little bit. 11-6-3 sounds pretty good. You still, though, have those other games kind of hanging over your head a little bit. It's still very much above expectations. I don't think anybody expected the Flyers to have 11 wins in the first 20 games of the season. And when you look around the league and you see the parity and you see how stacked up the standings are and how it's going to be, and it seems like it's going to be that way for a while going through this season, it's really remarkable how close the Flyers are to being one of the top teams in the conference and in the league in terms of points. You know, sitting at 25 points after all of these games, after 20 games, it doesn't sound like it's not through the roof outstanding. It's very good. And then you start to think about all the possibilities. Each of the 3 overtime losses they had that they don't get that second point could have easily gone the other way. Mention the Carolina game. A goal gets called back on goalie interference. The game against Edmonton, you think you have a win in regulation. No, it's offside. You lose in overtime. They lost in overtime to Ottawa on home ice the game before that Edmonton game, and dominated the last 40 minutes and looked like, erase a 2-0 deficit, which you don't want to be in, but get the game tied, get it to overtime, look like they're going to be the team that's poised to take the second point because they've dominated the whole second half of the game, but they make one mistake and they lose the game. Of the 10 losses that they have on the season, if you include Monday's game, which was game 21, 6 are by 1 goal, which, look, maybe that's neither here nor there. And prior to Sunday, when all the games were played on Sunday, after the Flyers had beaten the Devils on Saturday 6-3, the Flyers had the 3rd highest points percentage in the Eastern Conference and the 8th highest in the NHL. Now, points percentage is what it is. And you see that number increase when you get games to overtime, and there's a whole different discussion that we can have in terms of regulation status here. And we can certainly talk about the process of getting those wins, getting those points, how many times they've had to rely on the goaltending of Dan Vladar to even be competitive in a game, how many times the games have gone beyond regulation to get the 2 points. I get the conversation that should be had about the process, because it's not a very sustainable process. There's just, you're not going to be able to do this all year long and be successful. You can't play 3, 4, 5 extra minutes a game and expect to still have your legs at the end of the season. You can't lean on a goaltender whose career high is 29, 30 games in goal total and expect him to still be carrying the load the same way when February, March, and April roll around. It's just not going to happen that way. But they are finding ways to win games, and they are getting quality from some unexpected sources, namely the goaltender. And there are things working that are keeping them afloat so far. If you can transform those other parts of your game, then you really have something to talk about in terms of contendership, being a possible playoff team. Right now, they are in between. It seems like every other game, they win a game, they're back in the wild card spot. They lose a game, they're out, and there's 3 teams above them. That's the way the standings are. So first things first, you want to avoid the lengthy losing streaks and not gaining any points. And this month, they've been able to do that for the most part. They lose the game to Tampa on Monday. It's only the second time in the last 8 games that they didn't get a point in the standings. So you're doing something right there, but you need to find ways to win games, and you want to come away from games feeling the way you did Saturday. You play the Devils, you take advantage of a bunch of opportunities, you get a big lead, you make it look convincing, and you don't have to do it 6-3 and score, a season high in goals every single time out. But if you can win games 4-1, 4-2, and be in that, 4-2 with maybe a late goal against or something like that, those are going to feel so much better for the way that the perception is of it than constantly being locked in 1-goal games, overtime games, shootout games, and needing to really keep trying to find that way to win. The other part that's not sustainable is giving up the first goal. They've done it in 8 straight games. And as I mentioned, while they've gotten points out of 6 out of those 8 games, which is pretty impressive, it's not the way to play consistently. You don't want to be trailing in the game in the first period or otherwise and have to chase the game and find a way to come back and score 1 goal, 2 goals, maybe more to find your way back into a game. They've managed to survive it so far, but it's not something that you want to make a habit out of. And right now they kind of are making a habit out of it. So I wanted to shift to our next topic, which has to do with the rebuild. And this was a discussion that's really been going around a lot over the last week as things have kind of been more and more put out there into the open, I guess. Let's just start with the source of it all. Frank Sarvalli was a guest on the Snow the Goalie podcast and basically was very critical of the way the Flyers are rebuilding this, that anything short of being a top 5 lottery team is not successful this year. He called it a fundamentally flawed process, spoke about the fact that they don't have a first-line center or a first-pairing defenseman, a top defenseman in the pipeline right now, and that really the way to get them is through the draft, to be that team that, and more or less essentially was pointing to the Chicagos, San Jose's, Anaheims of the world that have torn it down and really reduced it to almost nothing, picked at the top 3-4 years in a row, and have something to show for it. And I think that's part of the reason it's a popular topic, because it's not just those teams are experiencing some success and starting to take steps after the years that, oh, you're Chicago, you got Connor Bedard, now you can take the step further. You got your franchise piece. And, and he's a center. And, in San Jose, you drafted Macklin Celebrini. You got your franchise center. You can take a step forward now. Or in Anaheim, oh, you got Leo Carlsson. You can take that step forward. It's not quite that simple. And I mean, you can look at Anaheim and even talk about Cutter Gauthier in this way, and the impact he's making. Those players being recent draft picks, recent arrivals into the NHL, and already turning the league upside down, and them being at the top of the stat sheets, just to see, okay, at the top of the list, it's still McKinnon and McDavid and guys like that. And then, oh yeah, by the way, in third is Bedard, or in third or fourth is Celebrini. And Leo Carlsson's right there. And you don't have to go that much further down to find a Cutter Gauthier or something like that. Because of that, I think that's where it becomes more of a topic, because now it's been, in Bedard's case, it's been 3 seasons since he was drafted. Same with Carlsson. If it's, Celebrini's in his 2nd season. Take a player like Matthew Schaefer, who gets drafted in the summer. He just turned 18 in September, and he's already taking the league by storm. You look at those level players and what they're doing already, and I think that's what makes it a hot topic, that these are the players that are starting to become the face of the league. And it doesn't help matters that your player in that category, if you're the Flyers, Matvei Michkov, who's in his 2nd season, is hitting the sophomore wall. Maybe didn't come into camp in the best shape, isn't in the same category, isn't even in the same stratosphere as these players right now. So that lends to it. And I think, certainly that'll give you doubt. And I think that it's unfair to start throwing criticisms out on the rebuild as wasted time. They did it wrong, whatever you want to call it. It's 21 games into this season, this 3rd season that they've taken such an approach. And I know there's people out there that are frustrated like crazy. Seriously, I can't remember seeing a reaction like this to usage of players and things like that. And that's after 3 seasons of John Tortorella. John Tortorella, who could sit anybody down at any given point, say, you're not playing for the rest of the night, you're a healthy scratch, you're whatever. And I'm not even close to seeing the same amount of fire that's going towards Rick Tocchet that I did with John Tortorella, all things considered. And I understand the conversation it's had with Michkov, and I understand, There's and I'm going to get into these specific players for what it's worth. Michkov, where he's at. Nikita Grebenkin's a younger player you acquired, so he was borderline NHL ready prospect when you got him. He makes the team out of camp, and now he can't crack the lineup, and he's just kind of sitting there observing, which is not the place to be when you're at his age, at his experience level, and you need minutes. Trevor Zegras playing more wing than center. It's too early to just jump and say this is all a moot point, that this is already over before it started. They're going to have to do this the hard way. They're not going to pick at the very top of the draft unless they finish in the top 10 somewhere and win the lottery like the Islanders did. And they're not going to be able to do what they maybe intended to do with free agency, because all of the free agents are drying up. There's virtually no centerman left, no defenseman left. There's nobody who you're going to pour a lot of money into for the long haul that is going to become a first-line center or a first-pair D-man. It's just not going to happen that way. So your options are either find guys in the draft at later positions or develop your already in-house players into these players, or make trades. And the one thing that they can speak of that they have is they have an abundance of wingers that they're not going to be able to keep, because you're not going to have enough ice time to go around. If you've got Michkov and you have Travis Konechny signed long-term, and you like what Tyson Foerster's doing, and he's a part of your long-term picture, and you have Porter Martone that you just drafted, who's killing it in the NCAA right now, and you want to have a place for him, and you still, you have Owen Tippett under contract. You have Bobby Brink, who is going to be due a contract at the end of this year. You have all those pieces. Like if you determine by the end of this year, and whether you give it the fair shot or not, if you determine Trevor Zegras is one of your wingers, you've got too many wingers. Somebody's going to have to be on the move. Zegras has been impressing enough that I think he's going to be a guy who gets a contract. Michkov and Martone are going to be untouchables at this point. Konechny, I think, is the guy you want to have kind of leading the charge, and I think it makes Tippett and Brink the most expendable. I think Foerster's bordering on untouchable because he brings a lot of qualities that they like. And this is not to say that Tippett doesn't have qualities that they like, or Brink doesn't have qualities that they like. But those guys, you're going to end up, based on the numbers I just gave you, or the amount of names I just gave you, if Porter Martone is on the Flyers roster next season with Michkov, Foerster, Konechny, Tippett, Zegras, maybe Brink doesn't get a contract. He's not playing like he shouldn't get a contract, though. But ultimately, I would have just counted 7 players. Now, you try to imagine a scenario where Owen Tippett or Bobby Brink or somebody like that is playing on your fourth line. It's great if you can find time for all of those players, but I don't think you want Bobby Brink playing 9 minutes a night the same way that you see your current fourth line being deployed. If 9 minutes a night is not good enough for Nikita Grebenkin, who should be certainly playing a little bit more, I'm not saying that, but eventually that's kind of how this works. Either that or you start to balance out the lines because they're all relatively similar. Your fourth line is not aligned with Nick Delorier and Garnet Hathaway and guys who are a little more physical. It's all go time all the time, and it's not about maintaining. It's about finding a way to continue to push offensively. So I just think it's unfair to start criticizing this whole thing and going crazy about this when we're still not there with the finished product yet. It's not this season that you're supposed to be getting the finished product. I think the time for this is at the start of next season. If they decide to run this whole thing back and aren't able to get a guy down the middle, their center depth is not good, especially if you take Zegras out of the picture. Then you're looking at Sean Couturier, who is not the Sean Couturier of 5 years ago. Noah Cates, who has taken some very nice steps, but I don't think you're going to sit there and say is a number one center. You have Christian Dvorak, who's been a very nice surprise for the team this season in terms of what he's been able to contribute. But again, probably not a long-term fix and not a top-line center. And right now, your fourth-line center is Rodrigo Abels. So you don't have anybody, and you really don't have anybody coming because your top picks of late have constantly been wingers. You don't have a player who can jump into that spot. I think defensively is a little different because as much as they could use a guy who is pure stud material, the Cale Makar, Miro Heiskanen type, first of all, I think there's going to be an intriguing option out there in Quinn Hughes. I think Quinn Hughes, if he is on the move and Rick Tocchet is coaching in Philadelphia, there's going to be connections there, and it may be a possibility. That's going to be one thing for sure and certain. But I also think that you feel a lot more comfortable with what you're seeing from Cam York and Jamie Drysdale in terms of growth, and Travis Sanheim has grown immensely over the years, and I tend to put a lot of stock into what people around the league feel about players like that. And people have a lot of respect for Sanheim. Maybe other fans here, you may not see it for that way because of mistakes that are made, because it's not always picture perfect, and there's still things that aren't perfect about his game. But the rest of the league seems to think that this guy can play. He's probably going to make Team Canada for the Olympics. And if you're one of the 6 guys who gets regular playing time defensively in the Olympics for Team Canada, where they could certainly pick a lot of other players, it says something about what the league thinks of you and what the people in charge of that program and putting together that Olympic roster think of you. So I certainly think that Sanheim is barely a step below that number 1 defenseman that you're looking for. He's ideally a number 2 defenseman, but he is not far off that you feel completely diminished there. Like, I think at the center position, you're lucky if you want to consider Noah Cates a 2C and everything else falls behind. So you're really lacking the talent level and the depth there. I think defensively, you've got 3 really good defensemen who all are worthy of being considered top 3, top 4 defensemen. And then you have to build it out from there. So like Sanheim, York, and Drysdale are all certainly fitting that quality. I've really liked the play of Emil Andre over the course of the early part of the season. I think he's still probably more or less call him a third pairing kind of guy right now, but he's growing into something that could maybe get to that level where a York and a Drysdale are. And then you've got the third pairing, which has its flaws. Nick Seeler hasn't been as good this year. Noah Juulsen's had his moments. Igor Zamula's had his moments. They've had good things and bad happen. So you kind of know what you're getting. So I think they're a lot closer to finding the top defenseman, or at least to feeling secure about their blue line, than they should be about the center position, because it really feels like they have next to nothing to go to there without making a trade. So that's going to be the one area that I think you really need to significantly address. And if you can do that, and if you can utilize the guys in your pipeline, whether they're guys you just drafted this past year, guys who have been in your system for long enough, you're going to run out of places to put these guys. So you're going to have to start doing something with some of these guys. And if it means trading a few to go and get a player who helps your lineup immediately, you have to do it. And that's going to be the way that they truly put an end to the rebuild and build a contender. But they have to find that trade. And I'm not going to just criticize them for not doing it yet, but they're getting to the point where they're going to have to start to get to that level. So let's go to our next topic, and it's about Nikita Grebenkin, and I've touched on him a couple times throughout the show. And Grebenkin, great story, makes the team out of camp, but has now kind of fallen into that place where you're not able to get into the lineup. It's a struggle to get you into the lineup. And Grebenkin can't be a regular healthy scratch, not at his age, not at his experience level. If he's playing, even if he's playing and it's under 9 minutes a night and you're going to keep hearing about finding him ice time, you start to have that conversation. What should you do about this player? And is it time to just send him down? For me, we're now well past that point. That was maybe 2 or 3 games ago. Maybe, you wanted to keep him around when you got past the extended break. Maybe even not then, maybe maybe it was the road trip that he did actually play in one of the games on, but maybe it was that road trip and he played against Dallas. And after that, if you kind of weren't sure where it was going to go, get him sent down then. You had 2 games at home where if something happened to one of your forwards, you could call a guy up and they could be there in basically next to no time. You could have had somebody ready to go. And he could have gone down and started playing in the minors a week ago. And he's still here. He's still on the road trip. And it really just doesn't make any sense why he's still part of this when he should be playing and getting more time. You see, he's played in 12 games this year. That's not nothing, especially when you're as a team, you've played 21. But it's the recency of the regularity with which he's not in the lineup that you've played. You played 2 games on home ice that he wasn't in the lineup. You played the first game of this road trip. He wasn't in the lineup. He wasn't in the lineup when you went to St. Louis. It's now becoming a point where, all right, 4 out of the last 5 games, he's been out as a healthy scratch. Maybe time to send him down. So, great camp for him. Good for him for making an impression, but it hasn't been there with the consistency that they want to see. And if it's not there yet, you have the developmental league that's behind you, in the AHL waiting for him. He's waiver exempt. You don't even have to pass him through. It's not like anything crazy is going to have to happen to make this happen. If you want him to go down, send him down. It's as simple as that. I want to turn to another Russian player, Matvei Michkov. Michkov reaching the 100-game mark of his NHL career on Saturday. And he marked it with a memorable moment. He scored a goal on a breakaway. I believe that was the 31st goal of his career. So, nice number through 100 games. You'd like to see a little bit more. Obviously, everybody would like to see a little bit more this season. But to me, there was elements when he scored that goal in particular, and it was on a breakaway, but he made a nice read to go through the neutral zone. It was something to me that reflected on growth of playing away from the puck, not hovering at the blue line, waiting for somebody to win a battle and get you the puck. He sees that the battle is already going to be won. They're going to gain possession. He sees an opening up the middle, jumps in, and Sean Couturier is ready to make the pass to him and gets it to him, and he goes in and scores on a breakaway. I asked Sean Couturier after the game about that particular play and, if that's more of what they're looking for with him away from the puck, because Couturier obviously had some critical remarks about Michkov's game and about away from the puck and, not cheating and all stuff like that. And so I brought it up and asked Sean Couturier about this particular play and if this is more of what you want to see from the player. And here's what he had to say.
Yeah. What I liked is, he back checked. He was in a good position, and once we saw we had full puck possession, he just took off, which is what we want. And yeah, when you have a guy like that that you can send alone on a goalie, we like our odds.
So you hear him bring up the back checking element of it. I think that's really important that Couturier brings that up, because that tells you that that's what they're looking for in that situation. Put yourself in a position to then turn defense to offense. He doesn't have to make a play on the puck on the back check. He just needs to be in position to give himself a chance to allow for support for other players who may be in a battle. And once you can tell the battle's going to be won, once you recognize the situation and you see room to go and try to attack in transition, do that. That's exactly what you should be able to accomplish. So it's a great play all in all, and obviously a great moment for Michkov to have in his 100th game, something that, contributes to it. It's the goal that puts them in the lead at that point. They obviously followed it up with 2 quick goals, but it puts them in the lead. So it's a big deal. And Michkov is, he's hovering around some interesting numbers at this point in the season, 5 goals, 10 points. They're not astronomical. He had gaps like this last year as well. And as he continues to try to find his game, let's see if those numbers improve any, don't, continue to look like a regression. There's so many different possibilities for where this could go for Michkov. And again, we got to remember he's still only 20 years old, and there's a lot of room for growth and a lot of room to develop your game and to find a way to become the player that everybody wants you to be. So I'm willing to give him time to see what happens. We've seen the skill set there. Obviously, he's able to make plays. It's just got to happen with more regularity. And I know that there's people out there that are frustrated with the amount of time he's getting and things like that. That's partially a byproduct of his own mistakes, though, too. If you come into camp in better shape and make a more immediate impression, you're probably getting the ice time that everybody wants to see you have. It's not there yet. It hasn't been completely there yet, not with consistency, not to the level that they need it to be for him. And it means he's not going to play every single game at 17, 18, 19 minutes. It's going to be some nights where he plays 13 to 15. And special teams dictates that. And game situation dictates that. And I know that everybody also wants to look at the overtime usage and why isn't he out there in overtime as frequently? I get it. And these are all things that they're valid conversation points, and it makes sense to criticize. I especially get the overtime ones. Okay. Like, you look at the 60 minutes of regulation and you have to go with the ebbs and flows of the game, when you can get a guy on the ice, when you can get guys off the ice after a long shift, power play, penalty kill, what the situation is to allow for a player to have more ice time. Overtime is overtime, and he's one of your most skilled players. He really should be out there more often in overtime. But those are the decisions that are being made. They have their pairs, they have their combinations, and look, it's worked for them so far because they haven't exactly given up. They've given up 3 overtime goals ultimately, but they've won a couple of games in overtime. They've obviously gotten more to the shootout and won those. So those are important as well, being able to play that way. So it all comes into the picture here. But you need to factor in that it's still a process, that it's going to take some time to get Michkov to that next level, to where you want him to be. And you got to bear with it a little bit. You can't just jump and be ready to jump off a bridge, because it's, the 20-year-old in his second season, 21 games in, has ice time that isn't the greatest. And oh, by the way, he didn't come into camp in the best shape and ready to go the way that he should have. And he admitted that. So keep all of those things in mind as we watch the rest of the season play out. And hopefully for Michkov, it gets better, because he's the player that really gets all eyes on him more than anything. So hopefully it continues to get better for him. Before we get towards the wrap up of the show and the 3 stars and everything with that, I did want to touch on something else that was going on Saturday night at the Xfinity Mobile Arena. And really, it was part of an entire weekend. Friday night, in between the 2 home games that they had, the Flyers held a celebration of life for Bernie Parent. And then Saturday was the tribute game, and what a fitting tribute, between getting all of the goals, setting a franchise record, having a goaltender give you a really solid performance that more or less sealed the win. Those are all very positive things, but obviously, whether it was the celebration the night before the game that featured all the speeches, featured, teammate reflection, you're thinking about all the people who spoke at the celebration of life, whether it was Bernie's wife, Bernie's daughter had a video message. You had players members of the Flyers organization, I should say, who did videos. Rick Tocchet had a video. Danny Briere was in a video. Keith Jones was in a video. Dan Hilferty was a key part of this and gave a speech in his own right. And what you capped it off with, though, and part of the Ed Snyder Youth Hockey Foundation and everything that Bernie did for that organization, representatives from them speaking about his impact. But I think that the impactful ones were when they got the rest of the surviving members of the 1974 and 1975 Flyers that won back-to-back Stanley Cups, and got them up there and had certain members of that team speak. And Bill Clement, eloquent as always with what he had to say. Bill Barber gets up there and speaks. Joe Watson, who's known Bernie for majority of his life, going on 60 years, because they were first with the Boston Bruins organization together. And then Bob Clark gets up there, and Clarkie kind of knew that he was going to hit people in the heart with the we'll continue to walk together forever until we see you again kind of line. And that was certainly touching in of itself. I thought the tribute the next night as they went into the game was especially profound as well. The spotlights on the banner with his retired number, putting the mask, which is part of the team celebration when they win a game, but putting it on the top of the net of what is the Flyers' goal on the Flyers' end of the ice. They're defending. I thought that was a particularly nice touch. It made for, it really set the scene well. It made for a great image. And, so once again, just another example of the Flyers doing one of these really well and hitting all the right notes when it comes to honoring one of their own and celebrating one of their own. And then the game that followed really lived up to it because you had probably the best crowd of the year on hand for this in terms of you get a few people who come down as Devils fans because it's not that far of a trip, but it didn't feel like the same number as it was in years past. It was a lot more Flyers fans. It was energy for it being a division rivalry. It was energy for the celebration that was going on, the tribute for Bernie before the game, all of the above. So really well done by the Flyers. And so just a great night at the arena, all in all. Let's get to the 3 stars of the week. And star number 3 is Travis Sanheim, the hero of Thursday's game against the St. Louis Blues, scored the overtime winner. It was his only goal and point of the 3 games this past week, but certainly an impactful one. So he is the 3rd star of the week. Star number 2 is Tyson Foerster, 3 goals total in the 3 games they played this past week. 2 of them, obviously, in rapid succession as part of the 3 goals in 26 seconds against the Devils. He also scored the game-tying goal against the Blues on Thursday. So he, with his 3 goals, he is the 2nd star of the week and the 1st star of the week. Dan Vladar, 2 starts this week, wins both of them, a 2.42 goals against average, 922 save percentage over those 2 games. Gave up 2 goals to the Blues, gave up 3 to the Devils, but really was outstanding throughout most of the rest of that game. He continues to be kind of the shining star of the season, the guy who I think everybody would kind of agree is the MVP to this point for this team. So certainly another big week for him, another reason to kind of continue to sing his praises and mention what a great offseason acquisition he's been. I think, the game against the Devils in particular was kind of something I was thinking about because Jake Allen went into free agency as kind of the goalie that everybody was going to be talking about. That was the guy that you figured teams were going to throw some money at, maybe some term, but certainly some money. And then the Devils got him to come back at way less of a cap hit, but for a lot more term. And Vladar was far and away the better goalie on Saturday when the Flyers played the Devils. And there would have been a lot of people that would have accepted nothing less than, if Jake Allen is the best goalie on the free agent market last offseason, you go out and get him. And the Flyers got Dan Vladar instead, and where would they be without him so far this season? Let's get to the look ahead. This is the upcoming schedule this week for the Flyers. It will start later on tonight, Wednesday night. The Flyers taking on the Florida Panthers on the road, 7 o'clock start time there. That'll close out the season series against the Panthers. Flyers will then play against the New York Islanders on Black Friday. A little bit of a different feel to this Black Friday game. It's not at home. It will be on the road. The Eagles are playing at home this year on Black Friday, so it looks like that's a big part of why the Flyers are on the road for Black Friday. That game is at 4 o'clock on Friday. Flyers right back in action against the Devils on Saturday to close out the 4-game road trip. That game is at 7 p.m. And then on Monday, the Flyers are starting a 6-game homestand. They'll face the Pittsburgh Penguins at 7 p.m. there. So that's the look ahead and the 4 games upcoming. So there will be certainly a lot to talk about the next time there's a show. And our next show will be next week, Wednesday, December 3rd. That will be ahead of another game as part of that homestand. But certainly a lot to look forward to during the course of that week. So stay tuned. December 3rd at 11 a.m., same time as usual on Wednesdays, that you will be able to watch the show, and we'll get all caught up again on another week of Flyers hockey as the season continues to move along. If you can believe it, we're already a quarter of the way through. It doesn't feel like it, but we are already that quickly a quarter of the way through. So that's going to just about do it for this week's show. Before I get out of here, again, one more reminder for you about all of the places you can go to follow me, follow my coverage of the Flyers, and all of the other things going on with BFA Sports. So I am at Kevin_Durso. You can follow me on the Twitter X platform, Instagram, TikTok. Search for it on YouTube as well. You'll get some of those clips, the pre and post game videos over there as well. All of that. BFA Sports, not just for at BFA Live Sports, for not just for this show, not just for Flyers Files and all of the discussions that we have week in, week out, but also for the Now Batting for the Phillies podcast and for the Trust the Mikes podcast with Mike Gill and MKB talking Sixers. The Now Batting for the Phillies is Mike Gill and Bob Wankel, Mike and Bob conversation, right? Like all of those. And Nernshaw Radio, covering it across the board, 4 for 4, everything you want to know. So certainly stay tuned for all of that is to come. And be sure to check back in with us in another week. A lot of action going on for the Flyers in short order, this condensed schedule as we kind of race towards different sections of time off. In December, it's going to be the holidays. In January, it's going to be the race to get to the Olympic break. There's going to be a lot of action going on over the course of the next couple of months, and you're not going to want to miss any of it here as part of BFA Live Sports and everything that we've got going on. So once again, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Flyers Files. We'll be back again next week. See you then.